So I think it's my turn to introduce Ian Tafoya. Go ahead, Ian, and I'm going to let you introduce yourself because he has so many hats and so many things going on. So I want to just let Ian kind of go. And Ian, he's one of our co-chairs of our zoning and planning, but very busy guy. So Ian, go ahead.
Well, thank you, Loretta, and hi everyone. What a big meeting. It's so awesome to see so many people tuning in to INC. We're talking about today lots of information about communities, how they need to be part of the solution to change for a better future, and how some communities have bared the brunt for a lot longer than other communities. It just crossed my mind that the very first INC meeting that I ever attended was actually in Swansea. And it just so happens to be a place where I've done a lot of work in fighting for environmental justice. But I was asked today to do a land acknowledgement, to talk about Indigenous peoples whom lived here in Denver, Colorado, and traveled through it. Denver, Colorado was never a permanent settlement until we settled it, until our society settled it. The Ute, Arapaho, and Cheyenne, they all called this place home, but even my ancestors and ancestors as far-reaching as the Mexica in Mexico traded and traveled through these areas. I always like to think about it that my ancestors who are Hickory Apache from the headwaters of the Rio Grande were much more rural than the cosmopolitan people in central Mexico. We've been doing a lot of work since the protests began last year to have honest conversations about who's been impacted the most, how COVID has impacted people of color more significantly, and how communities, Indigenous communities particularly, have been completely transformed by the loss of elders, loss of language, loss of culture. But we have an opportunity, I think, here in Denver to lead the way. We have great institutions like History Colorado and Historic Denver, of which I'm a board trustee, working to change this conversation. If you hadn't heard, Mount Evans, the former territorial governor who is implicated with the Sand Creek Massacre, the conversation to rename that mountain is continuing. And if you had not heard the name of Mount Blue Sky, it has come with consultation of the Arapaho and Cheyenne people. The Arapaho calling themselves the Blue Sky people, and the Cheyenne celebrating a day of renewal known as Blue Sky. I think if you call Denver home, it's really easy to understand how we could love the blue skies and how you could relate to those. I also want to remind people that the Cheyenne and Arapaho do not have tribal reservations or land grants for their own in Colorado. That the tribes that are being consulted are actually coming from Oklahoma and from Wyoming. So I think we have a deep responsibility to expand that conversation and to grant land back. That is what the tribes have been asking for a very long time. I think they're also asking all of us to be water protectors, and that means a lot of things. But why were so many people calling Colorado home? It's because we're the headwater state. And we have a deep responsibility. Millions of people and so much food that feeds the planet are sourced from the rivers that come from our great state. We understand that climate is deeply connected to how much water will be available. Just watch NASA send people to Mars. Well, the NASA scientists are telling us if we don't change our ways, that we are headed for a multi-decade mega drought by the end of this century, with Colorado in the bullseye. And so far, the scientists have told us that Grand Junction, where we get our peaches, is one of the hottest places to increase in temperature in the lower 48 states. So if we don't want to see great suffering, if we want to keep our skiing, we have to do a lot to fight to reduce our emissions and as quickly as possible. I know that I was a procrastinator in college, and yeah, I do a lot, and so you're always kind of being responsive. Well, we are at our deadline. We have 12 years, most scientists say, but I do believe that we can do it. Look at the youth that we just saw who are leading. They're facing hot schools, no safe routes to schools, not healthy food for healthy kids, and air quality that has reached the worst in the country. But we can do better. We know that our river is in disrepair for E. coli and not safe with high temperatures. We know that our industries that are dumping and have been allowed to with permits for a long time. Environmental injustice and undoing it is going to require us changing a lot. Our zoning codes for redlining, our building codes for how buildings are built, and permits that are actually thinking about the cumulative impact on communities. It's no longer fair for one industry to have 3 different tailpipes from their building and permit them as though they don't interact together and have an impact on the community. You know, President of America and the state of Colorado are pursuing a Build Back Better agenda. And thanks to citizen-led initiatives that I've been a part of, we actually have an office and the funding to begin directing those dollars back to the community. Unfortunately, there's still more work to do. There's more money to be raised, and I invite you all to support government initiatives and citizen initiatives to actually close the gap and fund for the future that we want to see. And lastly, about being a water protector, I want to invite you into a greater compassion for the unhoused in our communities. There, in the richest country in the world, Colorado is the 2nd growing economy in the United States. And there are people on the streets of Denver who can't wash their hands, access a restroom, or get their trash service picked up. If we don't center that humanity and we don't protect the water, we all lose. We have goals to have a swimmable Platte River one day, like we did before. I think we can do that again. If we center humanity, we work together, and we do it one neighborhood at a time, because that's what INC is all about, helping us learn from each other, helping us grow, convening spaces for challenging conversations, convening spaces to design the systems that we know will help us. Whether we're talking about parks or housing or criminal justice reform, I hope that you keep coming back to INC and that you work with INC to make a more diverse and equitable space so we can truly bring justice to our communities and honor the ancestors of people who live here and who are descended from the ancestors who lived here like me. Thank you.
Well said, Ian. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. And I think we always need to acknowledge those who come before us and those next generations moving forward. So, I mean, it's not just us here, it's people before us and it's people going forward. And today is a day that, you know, in April with, we're moving forward on climate sustainability. We have an active committee. Please join us on that committee. We want to work with the city and acknowledge Taylor and the work that the city is doing, but we know we all need to do more. So in saying that, thank you so much. We want to introduce Grace Rink. She is, she's the executive director of the Denver Office of Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency. This gives us an opportunity as INC and as RNOs to work with the city on issues going forward. And I know some committees are, some RNOs already have active committees, but I want to go ahead and introduce, you know, Grace and have her take over. And I think you'll get more information in the chat, but Grace, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself more? Trupi, did you have a question? Hold on.
I'm sorry, I'm seeing some stuff in chat that our interpreter can't be heard. So I wanted to just make sure we correct that before we go forward. Thank you.
I'll wait while we figure that out.
Yes. It's going? Okay, great. Sorry, Grace, go ahead.
Okay, no
Thank you.
problem. So good morning, everybody. So as Loretta said, I'm Grace Rink. I'm the Executive Director of the Office of Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency for the City and County of Denver. And if you give me just a moment, I'm going to figure out how to share my screen. And okay, I think I've done. Are you seeing my PowerPoint? All right, and then I'm going to make it full screen. And now I just have to do one thing. Taylor had asked me to do something about annotation, and Taylor, now that I've gone into full screen, I don't see it. Taylor, are you able to talk to tell me to do something? Oh, here's the more.
Yeah, it should be under the more options.
Yeah, there isn't.
Okay.
When I click on more, that option's not there.
Then let's roll with it.
Okay, fine. All right, well, listen, thank you, everybody. Thank you for that moment of administrative need. I have to hide myself so that I can see my screen. Okay, great. Whew, Thank you. Thank you for the patience with technology here. So today, my job is to set the stage for today's discussion. So I'm going to begin with an overview of our office and the metrics that we track. I'll also discuss the Climate Protection Fund, which is the official name of the 2A ballot measure, which passed in November. And I'll introduce our Sustainability Advisory Council. Sorry, not the people, but just the idea of it. And I'll conclude with an example of how this all comes together in our work in public policy. And I've timed myself. I'm going to do all this in 15 minutes or less. And now I tend to speak quickly and casually. So today I'm going to try to slow down and be more deliberate to help our translator. All right, so we'll begin with our overview. So the Office of Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency is the city's newest agency. I like to say that stakeholder engagement is in our DNA, because this office was born out of a negotiation between the mayor's office, city council, and external advocacy organizations. The office was formed by combining the Office of Sustainability, which had been under the mayor's office, with the climate action team in the Department of Public Health and Environment. And CASR, that's how we say our abbreviation, CASR became official in city code on July 1st of last year. So with becoming an agency and the 2A ballot initiative plus COVID, we had quite an illustrious inaugural year. So this is a quick look at how we're organized. We are 20 people strong at this point and generally grouped into these subject areas. A number of our team members are here today and they're going to provide you with more detail about our work. The primary metric that we track is the city's greenhouse gas emissions inventory. This chart is with the data that's current as of 2019, and it shows that buildings as a whole are our largest source of emissions, followed by transportation and a small slice for solid waste. Now the pie chart is a snapshot in time, whereas this bar chart shows progress since 2005, which was our baseline year. So we're pleased that overall emissions are down, but what this doesn't show is how we got there. And the vast majority of emissions reductions are due to Excel bringing more renewable power onto its grid. Now, what I find interesting here is the reduction in transportation emissions. It's really surprised me. But by digging into the data a little bit, we see that it's due to the impact of CAFE standards and increased ethanol and gasoline. I like to point that out because it shows how important federal policies can be. So the bottom line is it's great that total emissions are down considering Denver's exponential growth since 2005, but we still have a lot of work to do if we have any hope of achieving further emission reductions. And so speaking of reductions or continuing with the reductions, this slide shows our status, our current goal, and a new recommendation. Now, Denver published its 80 by 50 plan in 2015, which, as the title indicates, calls for an 80% reduction in total emissions by 2050. And as of now, that's the city's official goal. But from January through June of last year, we convened a climate action task force, which was charged with making recommendations to align Denver's goals with current climate science and to recommend not only strategies to achieve greater reductions in emissions, but also options for raising revenue needed to pay for those strategies. The task force released its report in July of last year, just as we became an official office, and it recommended eliminating all emissions by 2040. That's a tall order, and now it falls to our office to determine how to make that work. And another recommendation of the Climate Action Task Force was to raise revenue for our office through a sales tax increase. That was ballot measure 2A. It passed, and now we have the Climate Protection Fund. So the Climate Protection Fund passed with nearly 65% of the vote this past November, and it instituted a 0.25% sales tax to provide our office with up to $40 million per year to pursue actions in the 6 categories listed on this slide. So throughout the discussion today, you're probably going to hear us refer to these as the allowable uses. This is a serious game changer for Denver. We're only the 2nd city in the nation to have a dedicated fund like this approved by the voters, and it's especially exciting for us as a new office. So these statements dictate how we're allowed to spend the money, and the ordinance that created the fund also allows us to retain up to 8% per year for administrative costs.
Hey, Grace.
Now, as you might imagine, there is no shortage of ideas for how this money can be spent. Right now, our team is working on developing objective criteria that we can use to evaluate which projects should be approved for funding. Now, the pie chart here is just for illustration purposes to describe the balancing act that we're working on. So the chart shows the main priorities expressed in the ordinance that created the fund and that the people of Denver voted for, which is namely aggressive action on emissions reduction and improvements to air quality, combined with a strong focus on equity and resulting in new job opportunities for more people. So please don't look at the pie wedges as real numbers. This is just to illustrate that we're charged with balancing a number of key priorities. It's also important to note that while the ordinance requires us to spend at least 50% of the money over the life of the fund for the direct benefit of communities most burdened by climate change, we have been told by a few city leaders, including members of City Council, that we're to look at that requirement as a floor, not a ceiling. And so that's really how we're proceeding with the planning.
Hey, Grace, I just wanted to chime in. There was a request in the chat to slow down just a little bit for the interpretation.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Would they like me to go back?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'll pause for a minute and see if anybody.
All right. Is it okay to continue, you think?
And let me ask you one question. Is this available in Spanish somewhere?
We would have to have it translated.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Sure. Okay. So again, I'll try to go a little slower, but let's use transportation as an example to explore what this fund might be able to accomplish. And again, just like the pie chart before, please note that everything on this slide is just for discussion. No decisions have been made about how to allocate the money within the 6 allowable uses. So for this exercise, we're just going to split the money evenly between them. Now, I'm only using a $30 million figure here for 2021 because we don't expect to raise the full $40 million this year due to COVID. And our office, again, with the office being allowed to retain 8% for administration. So with those disclaimers out of the way, this would allocate about $5 million to the mobility category this year. And as many of you know, $5 million doesn't go very far in conventional transportation infrastructure projects. Additionally, the money in this fund cannot be used to replace money from other sources that's already planned for projects. So for example, the money in this fund cannot be used to accelerate the schedule of new bike lanes if those projects are already planned to be funded from another source. These are just some of the intricacies of government budgeting. But these flexible dollars can do some creative things. So I've already heard from advocates who would like to see the city purchase additional service from RTD to increase the frequency of some bus routes. $5 million would be enough to do that on 4 routes. There's also a call to fully subsidize RTD passes for low-income people. $5 million could do that for a lot of riders. We could subsidize the cost of e-bikes for many people. And I'm pleased to tell you, this is one of the first expenditures this fund is going to make this year. In partnership with the Colorado Energy Office, 2 programs in Denver have been selected for funding. Unfortunately, I can't share more details because the agreements aren't yet final, but hopefully within a month, we'll have an announcement about that. This past fall, our office received funding through the CARES Act to purchase 7 electric vehicles and locate them in low-income neighborhoods. We teamed up with Colorado Car Share to run the program, and the funding is subsidizing memberships for up to 450 income-qualified people. So this new fund could be used to add to that program and replicate it in more neighborhoods. Another example is in the Montbello neighborhood. Our Department of Transportation and Infrastructure is planning to run a shuttle bus connecting RTD bus routes to the train station. And they are open to that shuttle being an electric vehicle. So funding that type of service is also an option for the Climate Protection Fund. So we can get into these ideas and more throughout the discussion today and in following up and more Q&A. I just wanted to use this as an example to give you a sense of the scale and possibilities here. And now let's talk about the ways that we engage with residents to inform our management of the Climate Protection Fund and to determine our policy and program priorities. So it's common in the city's work to convene task forces of residents to provide input on new city policies and programs. The Climate Action Task Force is one example, and we'll also mention the Energize Denver Task Force later in this presentation and throughout the conversation. So task forces tend to be subject specific and time limited, but they're very effective. We decided it would be great to have something like that, but ongoing and not limited to a specific policy. The Sustainability Advisory Council was first created for the Green Pit Denver office under former Mayor Hickenlooper. It was really comprised of 25 representatives appointed by the mayor, and CASR took this opportunity as a new office to restructure it, to both provide opportunities for more people to be engaged and to continue the successful experience we had with the Climate Action Task Force in 2020. The intent is for the bulk of the work, constructive discussions and debates, to be conducted at the committee level. When a committee is ready to recommend a policy statement or program idea, they'll vote on it, and the co-chairs will present it to the full Sustainability Advisory Council. So I should add that each one of these 6, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but each one of these 6 standing committees has 20 people. So that's 120 people who are going to be involved with us on a regular basis. Each one of these has 2 co-chairs. They are the Sustainability Advisory Council, and they're appointed by the mayor. I'll get into that more on the next slide. So if the SAC agrees, the committees come up with a great idea for a new policy or program, they'll send it to us officially. And then we have an obligation, our office has an obligation to do some work on that idea and come back and report to them. You know, it's the back and forth dialogue is really what we're looking for here. So that's the real value of having this continuing engagement. Now, not every great idea can come to fruition, but by working through it together, we can come to consensus on why and then what the next step should be to try to advance that idea. So the SAC and the committees are intended to be a two-way street. As much as we will present to them about the work we're doing or contemplating, and for which we want and need their feedback, we also expect that they will come back to the table with their own ideas and recommendations. We'll listen to each other and together work towards solutions to truly make Denver a leader in climate action, sustainability, and resiliency. And this is just a quick slide, a graphic to show the composition of the SAC itself. So as I mentioned, you know, the heart of the work is done at the committee level, and the co-chairs plus 2 at-large members are the SAC itself, appointed by the mayor. And Council President Gilmore has appointed Councilman Cashman to be the city council representative to the SAC. Now, the SAC meetings will begin in May, and they will be available to watch on Facebook Live. Links will be available on our website, and we'll also post recordings of the meetings there as well. Finally, we arrive at how this all comes together in our policy work. I'm going to use our buildings and homes team as an example. The Climate Action Task Force recommended that by 2030, Denver should require all new construction buildings and homes to be net zero, and the same for our existing buildings by 2040. We're managing 2 processes now to get that done. One is a code adoption process that happens every 3 years, and the result will be a set of code changes that will be voted on by City Council early in 2022. The second is a task force called Energize Denver, which is helping us to determine what a building performance policy would look like for existing buildings. The result of that will be an ordinance that City Council will vote on again, either later this year or in early next year. And so you recall that the SAC has a Buildings and Homes Committee. So we're going to be discussing those policies in that forum and utilize that input and feedback as these policies take shape. But it won't stop there, because we're also going to ask our Science and Research Committee to weigh in and let us know if the policies go far enough to truly achieve the emission reduction goals we're looking for. And we're going to engage with what we call the CARE-J Committee, which is Community Adaptation, Resiliency, and Environmental Justice, to discuss how our policies will impact residents, highlighting the positive, but also acknowledging any harms that we might cause so that they can be addressed before policies are finalized. And here, our public policy dovetails or really comes to life with the Climate Protection Fund. We know that the work we're asking to do in the building space is hard. And if we aren't conscious about how we get to net zero, then low-income residents will be the last ones left to pay for aging utility assets. Thanks to this fund, we'll be able to provide direct funding and incentives for affordable housing. What we're most excited about is that this work will not only achieve cost parity with current utility costs, but also improve indoor air quality for residents. We know from work that's already been done here in Denver that low-income rental properties generally are not well maintained. And one program found that 30% of low-income residences failed their carbon monoxide tests due to leaking appliances such as furnaces and stoves, where less than 5% of market rate residences fail that test. We also know that the community of developers, designers, and builders aren't ready to go to net zero yet because they don't have the training and experience. The fund allows spending on workforce development programs. And while that needs to focus the majority of its spending on getting under-resourced people into good paying jobs, we can also support professional development for the design community. So the way I look at it is we're hoping to fund both the chicken and the egg in this scenario. And I'll end with this word cloud that was generated by our Energize Denver task force. We asked what they wanted to see from this process of developing a building performance policy, what they saw as important. And this is what they said. Although it's specific to that policy effort, I think it's quite applicable to our work in general. So during this discussion today, you'll let us know if this isn't the case. But the top 10 adjectives say to me that our office needs to focus on real projects that are effective and implementable and centered in equity. And I just want you to know that all of us who work in this office know that we work for you. We value our engagement with you, and together we're working for a better Denver. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Parry.
Hey, Grace, thanks very much. That was so much has happened. Even while you guys are doing the programs that have been done for years, you're creating a whole new reality for us here. I just want to say that I'm going to turn it over to Liz really quickly, but there's some really good solid questions coming up in the chat room. We have a really packed program. We are committed to recording and responding to all of these questions, and we'll publicize them for everybody, at least on the Inc. website, maybe on the city website in the next week or so. So we are reading you, we are hearing you, and you will hear back from us. So I'm just going to turn it over to Liz. And before doing that, I would just want to say CASR, Liz and Taylor have been spectacular partners in this. Their sincerity in wanting to work with Inc. and work with all of us. They are our neighbors, so they care about the world. So they've been great. They've been helped with design, promotion. The city paid for the translation. And I just want to thank you very much and turn it over to Liz.
Thank you, Parry. Good morning, everyone. My name is Liz Babcock. I'm also with the Office of Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency. And I'm going to field a few questions for Grace, and then we will move into our panel discussion. I think there was one question, Grace, about just a little bit more detail on the code adoption process, what that looks like for this year and moving forward.
I can only tell you a little bit about it. The process is run by the Department of Community Planning and Development. And from what I understand, first off, they do have their own public engagement process that they will be running, and it's scheduled to launch later this month. That's the latest that I've heard. And so when we do our follow-up to this meeting, we will provide whatever information we can about that. There is not a link to their website yet, but that is certainly a follow-up we can provide to this group.
Great, thank you. So as Parry mentioned, we would love for you all to put your questions in the chat. We won't have time to get through every question today. So our commitment is to follow up and get the information and provide that in a Q&A that can go on the Inc. website to follow up after the meeting. And we will have that translated into Spanish as well. So if we don't get to your question today, we will be sure to follow up, and there may be questions we just don't know the answer to either, and we'll track down that information and follow up with you. So I'm really excited today to talk about the wonderful group of people that are about to present on climate action and how it all starts and ends in neighborhoods, and the importance of our community and our neighborhoods in helping all of us work towards a goal of a climate safe future for Denver, for all the people of Denver, and ultimately for the world. So I'm gonna go ahead and start my screen share here, and I'll be running the slides for our presenters. I'm gonna let them introduce themselves for the flow of the meeting. And Parry, do we have a link with more information if people want to learn more about our presenters?
Yes, I just put it in the chat.
Perfect, thank you. So there is a link. If you want to learn more about our wonderful presenters today, you can follow that link and read more about their bios. So I'm going to go ahead and screen share. Can everyone see that? Great.
Yes.
Put it in full screen mode. Oops, I think I need to go up here. Great. So our first two presenters are David Gaspers, Principal Planner with Denver Community Planning and Development, and Angelle Fouther, Director of Communications for Urban Land Conservancy. And I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to David right now.
Thanks, Liz. I'm here to talk about complete neighborhoods, and it's an important tenet of Blueprint Denver, our adopted land use and transportation plan, to be working towards a city of complete neighborhoods connected by a complete multimodal transportation network. Let's start with an acknowledgement, though. When we say complete neighborhoods, it doesn't mean that all neighborhoods are the same. Each neighborhood in Denver is very unique with its own characteristics. Some of us live in historic neighborhoods and historic homes. Others in ranch-style homes with huge, beautiful green lawns. And others in more suburban communities with a classic 1970s or 80s split-level home. But neighborhoods aren't just where we live. Neighborhoods are made up of all different types of places that really make up our city. Neighborhoods are where we access fresh food, where we acknowledge our common history, where we celebrate our culture, where we can learn to be a kid again, where we can express ourselves in loud and exuberant ways. And our neighborhood should be places where we can have those moments of awe and wonderment. Yes, downtown is a neighborhood. And our neighborhoods also have really important parts of our life where we can recreate and try to be healthy, where we can see our kids learn how to play together, where we have those first moments of joy on the simplest things like a water fountain, and also places where we can step back and recharge amongst our busy lifestyles. So the point here is that neighborhoods aren't just where we live. We have all of these places that make up our neighborhoods, and it's the access of these different types of places that is what a complete neighborhood is trying to achieve, right? Because we shouldn't have to get on a freeway to get to a grocery store or a school or a park. We should have those types of amenities in close proximity to where we live. And that way we could walk to the parks, right? Wouldn't it be amazing if all of our neighborhoods had great sidewalks. Or if the destination was a little further away, we could get on a bike and ride in a bike lane safely to a school or store. And if it's, again, a little bit further trip, a local bus. Or maybe if we need to connect to one of our larger urban centers, we can use RTD's light rail and passenger rail system. The point here is that our neighborhoods, the city of complete neighborhoods, as Blueprint Denver envisions in 2040, is about shortening our trips to get to our daily needs. And if we are shortening our trips, that means we can make the right decision to walk, bike, or use transit, opposed to driving in a single occupancy car. And that can help us meet our climate goals by improving our air quality, reducing emissions. And I'll hand it over to Angelle.
Great. Can everyone hear me? Great. Thank you, David. My name is Angelle Fouther. I am Director of Communications for Urban Land Conservancy, and my Denver neighborhood is Montbello. And wanted to say it's really great here in Denver to have an efficient, top-tier city planning department that brings expertise to the task of developing comprehensive, livable communities and supports residents in their goals and visions for complete neighborhoods. But there are other experts in our midst that show us what we need. Mathematician James Newman once said, "Words of wisdom are spoken by children at least as often as scientists." Indeed, if we're to look to the wisdom of children through drawings they have made and other kid-focused images, we can learn a lot about everything that makes a complete neighborhood, such as having a range of housing options, great urban design, and historic character. We need street trees, parks, and open spaces. These complete neighborhoods should offer built places to go. Like in the top, you see hospitals and museums. In the bottom corner, you see schools. And on the left, churches. And a real important component is that neighbors feel safe. So even the dog in the bottom left corner feels safe being approached by a snake, it seems. Neighborhoods should offer services like post offices and libraries and firehouses and outdoor spaces to go, like parks and ponds and pools. A key component of mobility is a community connected by walkable streets. And other things that make us feel safe for children and adults to walk through the community. And for them to play and ride bicycles and scooters. Next screen. Next screen. Oops.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Angelle. We seem to lost the Spanish interpretation for a second.
Okay. Do you want me to go back?
Let's see. It looks like one of our interpreters maybe lost connection. She dropped off of the meeting. So
Sure. Just let me know where to go back to.
it sounds like Soraya is maybe
Taylor,
picking
she's
up.
saying she's there on the Spanish side now. I
Okay.
can hear her say. She's okay now.
And I think our slides got flipped. So if you go back to, then that's the final slide. One more, there we go. As well as driving cars, buses, and trucks. So as complicated as all of this can be, it's very simple through the eyes of children. It's pretty universal as well. When we break it down to its most common point, we all need safe shelter that's close to schools and services and places to recreate. And we need to be able to get to those places safely in different ways, whether that be on foot or in a vehicle. And as we saw in each and every slide in this presentation, outdoor green spaces, trees and shrubs and grass are necessary to complete the picture of a neighborhood that provides fresh air, blue skies, and sunlight, and that sustains us for life. Thank you.
So,
Thank you, David.
and then, I'm sorry to interrupt one more time. We have both of our interpreters translating at the same time right now. If one can choose who will go right first right now, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Cinceré. All right, so Taylor, I'm going to pause because I realize it's a little hard for me to see the chat while I'm going through the slides. So were there any clarifying questions, or are most of the questions ones that we can hold for the good Q&A that we're going to do towards the end?
Sorry, they come in fast and furious as well, so.
Yeah, no worries. Well, if there's nothing that stands out, we can move forward. And of course, we will have time to.
There's one question in the chat I'd like to address. It's someone asked, would love more info about the drawings.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Should I address offline?
No, go ahead right now.
Go ahead.
Yeah, very quickly. When I was thinking about this, you know, we use so many big terms and jargony terms, but if we were to ask a child about complete neighborhoods, so I just Googled complete neighborhoods, child drawings or kid drawings, or my neighborhood, kid drawings. And what we get is incredible maps that could be used by Denver Planning Department. And David, you can incorporate some of these, but some had names on them, usually just first names, others didn't, but kids have the idea right. They completely understand that complete neighborhoods are a combination of things and ways to get to all of these things. So you don't have to go out of your neighborhood, and you feel safe and you feel that you have what you need close by. So I think we can learn a lot by kids is the point.
Great, thank you. All right, we'll move forward to our next pair of presenters, and we certainly will have time for questions. We have a Q&A planned. I will go ahead and let's see what's happening here with the slides. Come on, there we go. I will introduce Naomi Amaha and Christian Steward to talk about reimagining Denver streets.
Thanks, Liz. Good morning, everyone. My name is Naomi Amaha. I was very fortunate to serve on the Climate Action Task Force and co-lead our transportation work group with many people that are actually on this call. I also am so fortunate to be a member of the Denver Streets Partnership, which is a coalition of organizations working every day to make our streets more safe and more equitable for those in Denver.
Hello, everyone. My name is Christian Steward. I am a community connector for the Department of Transportation in our Office of Community Business Engagement. I'm also the East Colfax Neighborhood Association president. Thank you for having us today.
Just want to pop in real quick. I'm not seeing Naomi and Christian in at least my little strip of 4. I can see, I don't know if others are seeing them or not. Taylor, is there anything we can do to make sure that they're showing up as the speaker?
I can
Okay.
see them.
Great.
Yeah,
good.
you just have to change your own view options.
Okay, good. Thank you. Please continue.
All right, so we'll get into it. What we decided to do was to have more of a interview type format, and so I will be asking most of the questions, and Naomi will be able to, weave us through the wonderful answers. And so the first question, and also I pose to the people who are online with us, I'm gonna ask you the questions as well. You feel free to answer them in the chat box, but we want this to be an engaging presentation. So first question, what does a complete street look like to you?
Thanks, Christian. You know, I think for me, a complete street is one that embraces all of the different modes of transportation and really tries to prioritize those that will get people out of their cars. So I think about a street where there is a dedicated and protected bike lane for those that want to cycle. I think about a space where families can walk together side by side in a comfortable manner to get to the park or visit a neighbor. You know, I think about a transit stop that is built in a way that really is comfortable for those that want to ride transit. So having a bus shelter, another type of protected means, you know, especially on those days in Denver where it's really hot or the snow is coming down. And I think, you know, a space too where we have dedicated bus lanes for those that are running transit and want to get to a place more expediently. You know, this concept around complete streets, it's a term that really speaks to the planning and design and maintenance of our streets, but really tries to ensure that all users have access, all users can travel safely, all users just have the ability to get to the places they need to go without having to feel like they are solely reliant on their vehicle if they even have a vehicle. I don't know, Christian, if there's anything you'd add or share about what you think about what a complete street is.
No, not at this time. Well, we can go on to the next question. Thank you for the answer. Question 2. How has the pandemic changed your perspective on streets?
That is a great question. So when I think back to when the pandemic first started, our climate task force was just really getting off the ground. And so beyond making that switch from virtual or for in-person to virtual meetings, you know, we really tried to think about how can we change the way that we live and exist and plan for the future to reflect the way that we want to live and get rid of the ways that we don't want to exist anymore. So I think about the changes that have not only been made in Denver, but in communities across the country and how they're reimagining what their streets are. And so I love how communities have embraced this concept around open or shared streets, which is really prioritizing pedestrians' use of those streets and trying to limit, if not completely remove vehicle access from some streets. And so I'm not sure if our slides are progressing, Liz, but if you go the next one, you'll see some examples. On the left is a street in Oakland, California. And then to the right is a street in Denver. And you see so many people walking and biking and rollerblading and convening together in a physically distant manner. I was fortunate to visit many of the open and shared streets, many of which with my 2 dogs. And it just felt like such community. It felt like everyone was really enjoying this space that in the past may have created stress or tension for them because they felt like they were competing with vehicles or not having the space to go about safely. So, you know, I think there's been such great things that have come out of this pandemic and has created a shift in how our minds and hearts think about the way our streets can be used.
So I would like to add a little bit here. With the Department of Transportation, when the pandemic happened, we opened these streets to be more based in people, right? Like streets are for people, and you know, we really wanted to emphasize that. One of the challenges that we saw as we did some evaluations of these open streets, in particular, I'm a community connector in Montbello, and so we did a ride and we rode the street that was supposed to be shared. Now, the behavior was not there. And so as we were riding the streets, what we saw is that because the behavior of having shared roads was not there prior to, and the communication rollout was maybe not the best, what we saw is that people didn't understand why these streets had these barricades. They didn't understand that, you know, you could ride your bike or walk down the streets. And what we noticed is that in some of our equitable neighborhoods that didn't have the behaviors associated around the walking and biking, like 16th, we saw that it was not utilized to the fullest effect. And I think that is worth noting, because as we continue to have this concept, we need to think about how equity plays a part of that, and how we need to be a little more pointed in our approach, and continue to, you know, shift the behavior. So when we do close these streets, people have an understanding and feel safe. So I was on these streets bicycling, and it didn't feel safe. It actually felt less safe, because, you know, people didn't know what the purpose of the streets were. And so just something to point out here, and we'll move to the next question. Question 3. What are your thoughts on streets in Denver? Are they complete?
There's been a lot of progress around complete streets. I want to recognize that in the work of the city and those leaders. But the completion of streets in the way that we've been talking about what a complete street is can vary based on neighborhood to neighborhood. You know, what we know is 40% of Denver streets have missing or substandard sidewalks. So that you see an example ahead. If I was, you know, walking with a stroller or walking with my family, you know, that top right picture, I couldn't walk with all of them, and someone would have to be in the street. Or we see a sidewalk that's just kind of completely stopped. We also know that less than 1/3 of planned bike lanes have been built. There's been amazing progress, and Grace spoke to that earlier. So want to acknowledge that, but there's a lot of potential too, especially as we think about connecting neighborhoods, especially those that don't have really protected bike lanes on their streets. And, you know, that last piece too, around, you know, 36% of residents have access to frequent all-day transit service. I'm so excited about how the revenue is already being discussed to be used from the Climate Fund in increasing the frequency of bus or transit in Denver. So there's a lot of great progress that's being made, and we hope that continues in an expedient way, because now is the time to ensure, you know, that our streets are complete, and that those neighborhoods that have been overburdened because of the impacts of climate are getting you know, the attention that they need to help and in making their streets more complete, and so that there is that access. And I saw in the comments too around, you know, in the GES neighborhood, construction and whatnot that is taking up the streets. And we want to make sure those community members that, you know, the things that they want to make their streets complete are actually happening too. So a lot of great progress, but a lot of work to come to ensure that complete streets are happening in an equitable way across Denver.
Absolutely. It's important to acknowledge the work that's being done. So I want to do that. I'm going to put on a different hat as the president of East Colfax Neighborhood Association. What I see in our neighborhood is you see people popping in and out of the streets. And when I first moved here, I thought it was an odd behavior. But you see people, they'll utilize the sidewalk that is there, and then they have to go into the street because there is no longer sidewalks, but then they're competing with traffic, and then they pop back on. So you see strollers, and you see people in wheelchairs who are just in the streets. They don't have the option to pop on and off. So there is some more work that is to be done. I also know from our Department of Transportation and Infrastructure that we do have some sidewalk gap programs coming into the neighborhood, and not just our neighborhood, but around the city of Denver. All right, next question. Question 4. How has Denver committed to progressing streets and neighborhoods? Examples, bike networks or new sidewalks and projects.
Yes, so we see to the top left, the prioritization of pedestrians and ensuring that the networks within Denver are prioritizing getting people around through walking and rolling and taking transit and bike lanes. And so, you know, we see that happening through the implementation of city's plans around community networks. So building out the bike network, and to Christian's point, the existing sidewalk program, and wanting to see, you know, more funding to ensure that that program is actually being executed in an expedient manner. You know, I think that is this ethos around people and making sure that we are getting people out of vehicles. And so that this notion of policy change, so the City of Denver's Complete Streets policy being updated currently, as well as investments through the bond, and now with this climate fund, there is great progress. And I think too, you brought up something really great, Christian, about, you know, we can have policy, we can have funding and infrastructure, but we need the will of the people. We need the will of the community and leaders like you within INC to help champion these projects and the movement forward on building a transportation network that prioritizes moving people and not solely relying on cars, because there are still many that don't believe in this. There are so many that don't want to see, you know, parking, for example, be taken away to build a bike lane. So we need community will to speak up and attend community forums on a weekend or on an evening to help show the support that exists for making this shift into really prioritizing pedestrians. And Christian, I don't know what you would share about your experience leading these community discussions on, you know, the great policies and the way that the city is moving towards, but what other supports that are needed to ensure their success.
Yeah, so I've told you multiple times I'm with the Department of Transportation Infrastructure, but under a grant called the Community Active Living Coalition. Now, before that, we were with the Department of Public Health and Environment. And what you saw was that we focused on a lot of policies when it came to active living and safe routes to schools. And so the Department of Transportation really saw that how important that is to integrate into the department. And so making those moves to even move our team into that department really focuses on community engagement. It focuses on, you know, active living and safe routes to schools. These are all things that we know impact our community on a large scale. And so, you know, we will continue to work in those lanes and have these very important conversations. Some of the other ways you see is assessments of our city's infrastructure, which is really important to include, because then we have a better understanding what needs to be done. And then the community engagement piece is important. Then we reach out to the community and really formulate these projects based upon what they need and what they want. So it's not the government making the decisions for communities or neighborhoods. It's integrating the neighborhood into the projects to make sure that how we implement and where we implement is exactly what the community wants and is asking for.
Yes, that's so critical. And I know through your leadership and others, really, there is a more intentional approach and making sure that community members are a part of these conversations on the front end and be able to help co-create what the design of their neighborhood looks like. And this process, I think, continues to evolve. And it's something I know through my work with the Climate Task Force, I've learned so much about how to truly do community engagement in an authentic way, especially in a pandemic where we're not able to meet in person. So I think at a minimum, there is a commitment. There's always room to continue to grow and evolve in that space, but just in kind of scanning the comments too, I want to make sure that we're touching on that piece. So thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, question 5. How will complete streets help reduce Denver's contribution to the climate crisis?
Yes, this is a great question. And as was mentioned before, transportation is the second largest source of emissions in Denver, behind buildings and homes. Also, too, Denver has one of the highest, what we call single occupancy vehicle rates in the nation. So that is one individual driving in their car to get to work, to get to an event, to get to the grocery store. And that is a really large contributor of emissions. And so I love this visual because it really speaks to the ways that we can move lots of different people. And so just looking at how many people can be moved in through transit and how many people can be moved through town through a bike compared to all of those vehicles as well. There's so much opportunity in moving people in a way that will have a significant reduction in the emissions that are contributing to the current climate crisis in Denver. And just something I want you all to think about too. And the infrastructure, definitely, there's more changes to come, but just thinking about what are the little things that we all can do in our everyday lives to rethink how we can get from a place. Because oftentimes too, many of these commuting trips are happening in a distance that could potentially be also happening over a bike, over a scooter, over taking transit, or if you're downtown taking, you know, the 16th Street shuttle, for example. I know that is just one example that does not touch many people, but, you know, little things that I would do before the pandemic started when I had meetings downtown was just try and find ways to not have to solely rely on a vehicle and really try to, you know, utilize the infrastructure that existed, knowing that there's much more that is needed to ensure people can get out of their vehicles. But that when I think about climate and how transportation is a critical piece of that, that's just something that always comes to mind, and how, you know, really ensuring complete streets exist across Denver will really help in getting away from that reliance on vehicles, especially even thinking too about those that might not have a vehicle. How can we make their lives easier and provide transportation options for them to get to where they need to go?
Thank you for that answer. From my side, really quick here is, I've been groomed by the Community Active Living Coalition. And I say that to let you know some of the strategies that we use as a coalition, and that I'm using currently in our neighborhood, not just our neighborhood, but also you know, in Montbello and Southwest. And so what we committed to having walking groups and biking groups. And from a neighborhood standpoint, that really is important to do. One, you know, to explore, exercise, and connect to one another, but you also are getting outside of your cars and walking around your neighborhood, assessing the infrastructure. I think this has been a really powerful tool that communities, neighborhoods really can hold on to in order to activate not just the people, but also activate the streets and show cars that we have just as much right to be on these streets as anyone else. And so, you know, it's fundamental that we start from the ground level, which makes sense when you're walking and biking. Okay, question number 6, and it will be the last question. What are the benefits of complete streets in creating an inclusive city?
Yes, so many benefits. So we talked a little bit about the reduction in carbon emissions if we're building streets that can accommodate multiple users on transit or biking and walking. From a public health standpoint, the more physical activity we all get, the healthier we're going to be. And so, you know, creating a space for all of us to get physical activity each and every day in our neighborhoods through walking or biking is really important too. And I think about as well the spaces that we can utilize to create community through promoting small businesses, through festivals and other types of small business ventures that can happen in an enclosed space that is dedicated to people. You know, I think about supporting strategies around resiliency and adaptation to plan for the future as we want to address or work to minimize the impacts of climate. There's nothing that I don't think is not good that can come out of it. There's just so many benefits around the lives of everyone, not only now, but in the future. So I think about all of us that exist, but also the future generations, and how can we create complete streets that will promote their safety, their public health, that can improve the current state of climate and can further create a sense of community and, you know, for all, especially and I'm just acknowledging the chat to those in our community that are unhoused and deserve a space to exist and thrive. So there's so many benefits that I see that can come from not only adopting policy, but actually acting on that policy change around complete streets and really trying to ensure those community members that are in neighborhoods that have been under-resourced for a significant amount of time have opportunities to live in a space that is promoting their health, that is promoting economic development in a way that serves them and helps to mitigate all of the burdens that climate has impacted on their lives.
Really quick, I feel like we're running long, I'm not sure, but I wanted to say that one of the things that I think about is the connectivity. You know, when we think about complete streets, and really been thinking about this very deeply. The connectivity, even when we're in our walking groups in East Colfax, being able to connect to your neighbors and understand who they are and have them understand who you are. At the same time as helping the planet, it just seems to, encompass all of the problems that we may see and are not able to identify, or even, assemble mass numbers to say, hey, these are the issues. And so that connectivity piece has really, really been important. For everything we said, the safety, the climate, the public health, the community, the resilience, and the adaptation. And I really encourage other neighborhoods that are participating to start walking groups and biking groups in order to bolster those connectivities that, we can show up to some of these bigger problems that we have. And so I'll end that there. Thank you for allowing us to speak to you. Thank you for having us. Yeah.
Thank you, Naomi and Christian. Wonderful to have you both. I think in the interest of time, we will move forward so that we can have some good Q&A. So I'm going to introduce our next pair of presenters. We are welcoming Cinceré Eades from Denver Parks and Recreation and Jasmin Barco from Groundwork Denver.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I am Cinceré Eades. I'm the Parks Resiliency Principal Planner with Denver Parks and Recreation, and I manage the newly formed Resiliency Program in Planning, Design, and Construction, and also oversee our Regional Trails Program.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jasmin Barco. I am with Groundwork Denver, working under the program Climate Safe Neighborhoods. So I'm excited to talk with you all today about what that is. But first, let's get into a little bit of history and talk about redlining in Denver and what that means. So this is the redlined map from Denver in 1938. And this came to be after the Great Depression in 1933. The federal government thought about how they could help build wealth within the United States and came up with the idea of federally backed mortgage loans. But they had to secure their investment and realize or come up with a sort of scale of which neighborhood or area is safe to invest in and which neighborhood or areas are not safe to invest in or are a risky investment. So we have the HOLC, a homeowners loan corporations map, or HOLC, where realtors went out into the community, surveyed, and literally outlined different neighborhoods. So green were grade A, or the safest neighborhoods to invest in. Blue were grade B. Yellow was grade C, and grade D, or the worst and riskiest neighborhoods, were redlined, or grade D. So I want you to keep your eye on the redlined areas. So this is a map of the land surface temperature. And this next one is the tree canopy. And this is the impervious surface temperature maps. And compare that to—
Jasmin, can I just ask you if you can kind of give us kind of the areas, kind of a little more definition so that we know exactly what we're looking at, just to help people a little bit, because it's, it's so small.
Yeah, well, I highlighted Global Area Swansea on the map. I don't think you can see my cursor since I'm not the one sharing my screen, but yes, thank you, Liz. So that's the area, and then you can see I-25 kind of run down the area over here. Thank you, Liz. So yeah, that's just the general map of Denver. Yeah, so you can see there, we did an analysis. So the Groundwork USA Climate Safe Neighborhoods, there were like 5 total cities participating in this program, Denver being one of them. And on average, we realized that the difference between tree canopy in a green lined neighborhood versus a red lined neighborhood was a 22% difference. There was a 5% temperature difference as well because those trees weren't there, and a 20% difference in impermeable surface. Redlining codified segregation, and the 74% of redlined communities still have majority, minority, and low-income populations living in them. When this happened, a lot of people that were living in these redline communities couldn't buy, sell, or leave these communities. So someone in a redline community wanting to get out of that community was discriminated against and were not shown other properties in other areas where they could leave the redlined zone. So they were really stuck. Cinceré, do you want to tell us about what's happening in Denver now?
Yeah, so in 2018, voters approved a sales tax increase similar to the Climate Protection Fund. We have renamed our 2A initiative the Parks Legacy Fund. And what's great is this funding has really been able to move the needle on what Parks and Rec is doing because we really see parks as critical infrastructure to placemaking and to our city. And so our funds were able to develop a dedicated funding for acquiring additional park land. We have a goal to provide parks within a 10-minute walk or roll to every community member in Denver. The funding is also prioritizing improving and maintaining parks. And we've really started to apply the new equity index that the city uses to identify neighborhoods of the highest need. And so that's where we're focusing a lot of our funding in improving and acquiring parkland. We're also building and new parks. So making sure we're providing a variety of amenities and recreational opportunities to all communities. We're really putting a huge focus on restoring and protecting our natural features, including our tree canopy and our waterways and native urban ecosystems. And then we also, through our urban or our forestry initiatives and neighborhoods, we're also expanding our tree canopy, especially in neighborhoods with a high urban heat island index. This funding was also instrumental in helping, along with the game plan for a healthy city, really develop the new resiliency program, which I feel honored to lead for the department. And so a lot of our work is focused on making sure, again, that we're really protecting and restoring our urban ecology. And so, as you can see on the screen, you know, really a huge focus around our pollinator habitat and making sure that we're protecting landscapes and native features that enhance and protect those resources. I have a huge focus on water conservation. We're implementing tons of new technology to make sure that we're using our irrigation efficiently to save water. And through some data inventories, we've been collecting the landscape typology, which is the image to the top left. We've been able to map all of our resources and are starting to track the data and metrics around water reduction. We're also working very closely with a lot of internal and external partners to make sure that we're focusing on restoring our waterways and that they not only provide habitat, but they're also conveying stormwater and protecting properties and lives from safety in huge storm events. And then also working closely with the Office of Green Infrastructure to make sure that we are overlaying a lot of the work that they're doing in the right-of-ways with our goals around increasing our tree canopy within the right-of-way as well. So we're really starting to work together and strategize how we can implement both of those goals that are mutually beneficial. And then we've also just recently were awarded a GoCo Resilient Communities grant to build a youth program within the department that is focused on providing career pathways for youth in some of the more underserved neighborhoods and paying them minimum wages and getting them engaged in this work as well. So Jasmin, do you want to talk more about the work that Groundwork Denver is doing in some of these neighborhoods that I've mentioned?
Sure thing. So I'll be talking about climate safe neighborhoods. And really, climate safe neighborhoods are neighborhoods that mitigate heat and flood issues brought on by climate change. And so we can do these things like on the image to the top right, by installing reflective roofing. This could be in residential areas or in commercial buildings. We can get a little bit more creative and have some misting stations as well, which is the image right underneath the reflective roofing in parks or even bus shelters. One of the more popular ideas is to have more street trees. It's tried and true. It does help cool the asphalt that gets super hot and therefore cools the neighborhood. There are also residential rain gardens, which is the image to the top left. And that is where water from a home's downspout gets diverted into a natural area where the water can then seep into the soil. We're also doing things like rain barrel installation for water, and that can also help a resident maintain their newly planted tree or other vegetation in their backyard or front yard. Underneath the residential rain garden image is an example of vegetation to also help mitigate flood efforts within the city, because the more vegetation that we have, the more the plants will be soaking up the water, the cooler the streets will be as well. And then finally, one other example are bus shelters. We have so many bus shelters here throughout Colorado that are just a bench, if they're even lucky to have a bench. And so installing shelters to protect people from the heat and or snow would be great. And we can even get fancy and install things like solar panels for lighting at night, which will help improve the safety of neighborhoods as well. So those are just some examples of some mitigation efforts that some climate safe neighborhoods are starting to implement and that we hope to see more of here in the city of Denver. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cinceré and Jasmin. It's wonderful to have you both sharing the wonderful work that you're doing with us. I'm going to just do a quick time check because I want to make sure that we have time for discussion. Our last two presenters are Taylor and Sunrisa from our Office of Climate Action, Sustainability and Resiliency. And so I just want to do a quick time check to make sure that we do have time for Q&A because I might ask them to graciously give up just a bit of our time so that we can do more Q&A. Parry or Taylor, can you tell me where we are? I think we're
about 12, 13 minutes behind. So
okay.
I think we're okay if we go a little over, okay? Just to let you know.
Okay, great. So what I would ask then, Taylor and Sunrisa, if you can try to quickly kind of move through the content that you want to present, and then you can weave in more information as we answer some of the great questions that we're getting. Does that sound like a good plan?
Perfect.
Great. All right. Take it
Awesome.
away.
Yeah, so I'm Taylor Mollers. I'm the Sustainable Neighborhoods Administrator with our Office of Climate Action, Sustainability and Resiliency. I'll try to keep things super short. We already heard from Grace about the office, so just going to provide some details on a couple of items. So the first would be in the buildings and homes space. So buildings and homes are responsible for 63% of our greenhouse gas emissions, and on average, we spend about 90% of our time inside. So the city is working on policies, programs, and incentives to move all buildings to net zero emissions, which will not only obviously help the climate, but it will improve air quality, comfort, and health outcomes for those who are spending time in the buildings. We have a couple of ordinances already on the books. I won't go over those, but they're the benchmarking ordinance and green buildings ordinance. We can provide more information later. I wanted to mention we do currently have a Energized Denver task force, which is made up of different stakeholders from the community, different industry groups who are working with us to design a building performance policy for existing commercial and multifamily buildings, really focusing on improving health and equity, creating jobs, and of course, reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Another area that we are working on is energy. So the city has a goal to reach 100% renewable electricity by 2030. This requires close coordination with Xcel Energy, but also we're looking at innovative ways to get more renewables on the grid. So one I think INC helped us promote was we partner with a group called Solar United Neighbors to run solar co-ops. And that is where multiple households can go in as a group to buy rooftop solar. So everyone gets their own proposal. The solar is on their own roof, but since they're going in as a group, they get bulk pricing, so discounted pricing, which helps both the residents and also the solar company to be able to install on a more massive scale. We also have a Renewable Denver initiative, and this is around putting community solar on city-owned property. So some of that power will be used by the city, and then some will be available to residents and businesses, and there is a set of at least 10% of that power will be dedicated to low and moderate income residents to be able to subscribe to that community solar power. The next area, we already talked about transportation and streets a lot, so I'll just mention that our office is the lead on the city's electric vehicle work. So this includes providing information on how individuals can make the switch to an electric car, what options are out there. We're also continuously adding more public electric vehicle charging stations across the city at places like parks, rec centers, and libraries. A recent project, we partnered with a nonprofit called EVgo to add electric vehicles to their car share fleet. So car share is where you can take out a car if you need it for one trip. Maybe you don't need to have a full-time car ownership, but there are certain things you might need to use. So we work with them to get electric vehicles out there and then also provide discounted memberships to the car sharing program. And we also worked this past year in the Montbello neighborhood. We led a community-based needs assessment to better understand the unique challenges that the community is facing in accessing different transportation options. And it's really good for us to be able to get out there and experience those challenges firsthand so that we can, co-create solutions with all the different community organizations and the people who are facing those challenges. So the solutions are really workable for everyone. And then my last piece here is just on resource management. So we've got community planning and development here. We work with them on their neighborhood planning initiative. We've got Parks and Rec who spoke as well. I know there's a lot of questions and comments in the chat about green space. And we also have, I wanted to point out what I think is really cool, a resident initiative project, the Denver Compost Challenge. So that came from a group of neighborhood leaders from multiple neighborhoods who wanted to have a little friendly competition to see who could get the most people in their neighborhood composting, whether it was through the city's compost collection program or composting at home, also helping educate their neighbors about reducing waste, reducing food waste, what restaurants are practicing food waste reduction, all of that. So I'll just wrap it up by saying I have been able to work in Denver's neighborhoods with neighborhood groups for many years, and I'm just always impressed with the passion, the ideas, just the variety of experiences and perspectives that you all bring to each unique situation. And I just want to say that's really valuable and meaningful to the work that the city does. So I'm excited to keep learning more and learning with you guys, and hopefully we can build some great solutions together. So I'll pass it over to Cinceré to wrap things up.
Thanks, Taylor, and thanks, everybody. It's okay if you could just take down the PowerPoint slides, that's fine. I wanted to give us a chance for those that are willing to come back on into camera mode here. We could build a little bit of ink sustainability community. Feel like that would be fun for those that are willing and that are still around and not, you know, multitasking or in your pajamas, all of that kind of thing. I understand if you are. Thank you for those coming on. My name is Sonrisa Lucero, and I'm the Sustainability Strategist with the Office of Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency. A little bit of fun things. I'm actually a third-generation Denverite. I grew up on the north side. My grandmother's a Thunderbolt from Manual. Yeah, right, getting some fist pumps in the crowd. And that's on one side. And on the other side, my family, you know, I'm a granddaughter of migrant farm workers. And they were migrants all the way from New Mexico and were there for hundreds of years. And yet they were, you know, still treated as non-citizens and as immigrants, even though they had been here before this was a country. And so I really appreciated Ian's introduction and the acknowledgement of, oh, yay, hi, Christian, I see your daughter. Yeah, so it's wonderful to think about everybody that is here, that is a part of our community, that has been here and that continues to shape it. And I've been reading your comments as we go, and I really appreciate the concern and the care that all of you have for our great community of Denver and all of the places where the city has been failing up to this point, and all of the ideas and hopes and dreams of how we could be better. I think something that is super exciting for us as a city is that in just, maybe Cinceré can correct me on when their 2A passed, but I think it was just in the last 2.5 years, the city has created 3 funds to deal with a lot of the concerns that you all have been bringing up in the chat, whether that is not enough green space for us in our community, whether it's not acting strongly enough on climate, or if it's addressing our growing homeless problem, the problem with people that are experiencing homelessness. Last summer, due to COVID, I was actually redeployed to one of our shelters, the one that was at the Coliseum, and was there for about 4 months, working at the Coliseum with our women and transgender individuals experiencing homelessness. And to me, it may be curious, right? Like, what does someone in sustainability and climate action have to do with that? But I actually personally think that homelessness is the ultimate sustainability crisis, right? The ultimate sustainability failure. When we have systems that are not serving everybody and taking care of everybody, people experiencing homelessness is going to be a outcome of that. And so it's with great enthusiasm that I look forward for our new office that has merged our climate team, our Office of Sustainability, our waste management crew, materials crew, and with this new charge from you, the people, in our bill that created our office, and from our climate action task force and so on, that we really do have to center the most impacted by climate, by our sustainability issues, which includes population growth, which includes water and other resource limitations that we have here in our West. And also because, Denver is also the largest city for other than Colorado Springs, right? For 900 miles, right? So we're kind of an island in and of ourselves that way. And so it's kind of unique in that set point, which means that in that setting, which means that we have to be very sustainable and self-sufficient and running our work well. And so well, each of us as staff members are on our own place on our equity journey, on learning what it is to be a good ally, to center the most impacted, to put low income and most impacted and BIPOC folks at the center of work. It's still relatively new for our office. Our office is not even a year old yet. We're still trying to, we haven't received our first dollars to be ready to spend yet from our climate protection fund. And we really are looking to you all to help guide us on how we are going to invest back into community. So one of the groups that I'm leading is our CARJ committee as part of the Sustainability Advisory Council. And that's our community adaptation, resiliency, and environmental justice group. And we are in partnership with that group and many others really going to be looking at how, listening to frontline communities, to community-based organizations, to neighborhood groups like yourselves, and really trying to reinvent the way in which we do relational partnerships with our residents in Denver. It used to be we have a public meeting and we advertise it as best we can, and then 10 people show up, 15 people show up, and that qualified as community outreach. And no one ever believed that was the right thing to, the best way to do it, but that was what we had, right? We are trying to reinvent that right now, and we need your cooperation, your partnership, and your support in doing that. One of the things that we did with the Sustainable Denver Summit prior to COVID, now that we can't convene in that same way, is we asked everybody for commitments to action, and we did that with the city as well. And so every single summit, we would say, here's where we are, here's where we're trying to go, here's what the city is able to accomplish in that, but we can't do it by ourselves. What are you all able to help us with? And we would all make commitments to action together. And so I think that is what we have to do going forward as well, is to continue that type of partnership, continue that type of mutual, barn raising kind of idea where we all work together to make our city better. And, we as city government officials aren't always going to get it right, and we really have to be engaging with you all. So with that said, I invite a deeper conversation with each of you as individuals and with your respective neighborhood organizations and with Inc. as a whole as we go forward, to be able to identify the types of projects that, especially as Grace mentioned in the beginning, there's that first, at least 50% of our projects have to be that we use the Climate Protection Fund for. At least 50% of them really have to be reflecting equity principles and contributions back into community. We can't just use all of this to buy, city electric fleet vehicles and upgrade the energy efficiency of our city buildings, right? We have to actually invest this money back into community. And that's where these kinds of introductions, this is really just an introduction, right, of you all to our work and us to you, are really important. And so I invite you to be with us to figure out how it is that we invest that tax fund back into community, how we do it in a way that makes us a cooler city, that makes us a less polluted city, that makes the air and water, cleaner, and that also reduces our impact into climate action or into climate change. And with that, I'll try and wrap it up because I know we're trying to keep it shorter than longer. So I really look forward to hearing Dr. Fairchild speak, and I thank you all for being here today.
Thank you, Taylor, and thank you, Sunrisa. So I know we have very limited time. What time is Denise scheduled on our session today?
11:10.
Okay. So I know that someone said earlier we could go over a little bit, just looking for some consensus around having a couple minutes of questions before we move to Denise's presentation. Does that sound good? Great. Okay, so One of the questions I saw pop up a couple times in the chat was about just pollution in general and what are we doing to address pollution in our community. We talked a little bit about greenhouse gas emissions in the beginning, where those emissions come from. That is only looking at carbon pollution. There's obviously other kinds of pollution that impact our communities as well. And so we are actively, besides doing all the work that was mentioned, we're also actively involved at the state level. So we intervene as a party at the Air Quality Control Commission to advocate to the state for climate action and air quality protections. And so we think that it's crucially important that Denver be at the table for those conversations and be an advocate for ensuring that we are pursuing more stringent air quality regulations, more aggressive climate action, so that we can actually stop the sources of pollution. Now we know that we can't control everything. There are major sources of pollution that are outside of Denver's boundaries, but we have a role to play, and it's really, really important that we are at the table for those conversations. In the Q&A document, we can put some links to information about what we're doing, positions that we've taken on various state rulemakings and other actions that are happening at the state level. With that, Taylor, are there other questions that you saw as you were watching? Because I was kind of advancing the slide, so I wasn't reading all the chats, and I was trying to kind of go back through and look, but are there things that popped to mind for you that you saw come up a couple times that we should ask some of our presenters? And while you're answering, I'll go in and look as well. And somebody said if you have thoughts as well.
I saw a couple of questions that had to do with how the city is getting feedback and how we are engaging with all residents. So I don't know if we sit in different agencies and things. So I'll just speak for our office. We get feedback and input from the community in a variety of ways. The Climate Action Task Force, I think, is one of the more robust examples in the recent future, bringing together, I think it was 20-something different community stakeholders. Naomi was on that task force here. Jasmin was on that task force to really provide feedback on, climate is a huge topic and there's so much that goes into it. Obviously with all of the presenters that we've packed in today's presentation, and there's tons more who we could have tapped for this. So different groups that we can get involved with. We have some advisory groups right now for our electrification planning to get the input of building owners, homeowners, real estate, just a variety of different stakeholders. I don't know if anyone else from the panel has more to add on kind of unique ways that we are getting input from the community.
I just want to jump in here real quick. So some of the ways that we're doing it, evaluations is a huge thing. We know that there is a over evaluation survey, for a lot of our equity neighborhoods. And so what we've been offering for some of our more in-depth evaluations, we've been offering $10 gift cards to fill out the evaluations. And we noticed our last evaluation, we had 50 people. And then once we offered the gift cards, we had 250, 300 entries. And so that's one way. Another way is that we are using an equity index in order to point our, in order to know what neighborhoods are underrepresented and live in, and the way we're engaging those communities are through walking and biking groups, using those platforms to evaluate the work that we're doing and what we could be doing better. Another way we have is we have the Community Connector Program, which I am a part of. So it's actually hiring people in these neighborhoods, these equity neighborhoods, to be the eyes and ears of the neighborhood. And so that really allows us to centralize the work that we're doing because we're hiring people from these neighborhoods.
I know. It's because,
Thank you, Christian. One of the other questions, I'll just put one more out to the group. One of the other questions was how will we evaluate and measure success? And I would love to hear from any of the presenters who would love to speak to that, either the city staff or from the community perspective, what criteria or measurement is important to you and the stakeholders and the people that you work with. How will we know that we're successful in achieving our climate goals, our equity goals, our sustainability goals? What's critical for you all to see?
You know, I'll chime in quickly, just that it's interesting, right? Because I think the challenge that we've had in the past is that we kind of will, at least we did this with the 2020 sustainability goals in some ways, not all of them, but like we might pick a solution already, right? And then we want to measure against that solution. So we might say, okay, we want to reduce water per capita or something like that to a specific number and then go towards that number. But what I'm really hoping that we can do a little bit, and we'll have those kinds of goals as well in the future, but I think it's also important that we really talk about a human-centered design and target universalism. So there are two different approaches that I think are really important for us, where we think about how it impacts humans and how it impacts people in their lives, and are able to kind of think about true results in the lived experience of the people of Denver. And so quantifying that is going to be a challenge. And so, you know, we'll have to kind of, I think, co-create that again together with the CARE-J group and others as we go forward. That's at least a question that I will have for them. And then target universalism always means, of course, that we are not assuming a one size fits all, right? So a solution that works for one person is not necessarily going to work for another person. And so I think the trick for us is to figure out what is it that we actually want to set as a goal, set as our guiding star, and then how do we pick the appropriate ways to be accountable back? Because that's what really the whole point is, right? Is how you get feedback if you're doing well, if you're not doing well, and how are you being held accountable to everybody else and to the people that we're responsible to. And so I think that's going to be a really interesting question for us as we go forward, is to figure that out, because we can meet certain goals without really ever getting there. And I think that's at least on the equity side, the things that I'm really focusing on, like targeted universalism, human-centered design, is a question yet to be answered. And I'm excited to find out that part. Now we have other goals that are much more quantitative, right? That you can measure in greenhouse gas emissions, or you can measure in kilowatt hours and things like that. But from the things that I'm working on, I think we're still trying to figure that out.
Thanks, Anrisa. And I see Angelle has her hand raised.
Yeah,
and before, oh, sorry, I was just gonna say, I wanted to acknowledge in the chat that folks are frustrated that this isn't more of a dialogue. And I was going to personally just offer that I will be happy to stay on the call and answer any questions afterwards. I know that we started a little bit late and we ran a little bit long. Certainly wasn't our intention. And I know, you know, Parry and Jane were the organizers, and the city folks who are part of the presentation worked with them to bring people who had expertise to the conversation. So certainly not our intention to get a little bit shorter than we wanted to on the Q&A, but I'm happy to stay on. I don't know that everybody is able to do that, so.
And the other issue was our business meeting went over, but INC business, you guys know, it's like we're trying to keep it to a defined time, and our issues typically go over. So we're sorry we cut into your presentation time.
No problem.
And question and answer time.
Thank you very much. And Angelle, to you, and then we will move to our final speaker.
Yeah, I want to say thank you for the opportunity to participate in this. I am in no ways a climate control expert, and you know, so I appreciate the opportunity to learn and hear in this session. And speaking, you know, from a community perspective, I think a lot of what we discuss and hear about today still needs to be normalized, especially in communities that experience inequity, such as my community. And so I think one measurement is how normalized, to sort of gauge normalization, how accessible do residents feel that these resources are, such as like solar options for homes or businesses. How normalized is it, you know, for folks, and how do they feel like they can get what they need for sustainable energy? And that'll go a long way to prove that this isn't just something for folks that have a luxury of considering sustainability, but it's a necessity, and everyone feels that there's some accessibility.
Well said. Thank you, Angelle. That was a really great group of panelists, really wonderful questions. We do promise to follow up with all of the Q&A. We will provide the information in writing on the website. We will translate it. And like I said, I'm happy to stay on. I will turn it over to Parry to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Liz. And I want to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Denise Fairchild. She comes to us through her work nationally on equity and renewable energy, looking at this as an opportunity to unify and restore equity to our communities all over the country, not just here in Denver, but because I think she's had a good connection with the work being done in CASR. She didn't hesitate to agree to give up 15 minutes of her early Pacific time morning during vacation to share some of her thoughts about how do we build back better and restore our community. So I'll just leave it at that. We have information again in that bio page for more. So Denise, take it away.
Well, thank you so much, Parry, and thank you, Elizabeth, for bringing me into this space with you guys in Denver. Yes, I'm here in Los Angeles, and yes, this is my vacation, but I'm glad to be here. But I do apologize not being a part of the full day that you've had and be part of the conversation. So I hope anything that I say may have some relevance to where you're headed. And let me also say, Parry, I was not able to prepare slides, but then I did just a minute ago and didn't know if I could share screen and if that is something that I can help guide the conversation. So I will try and do that, and greetings everyone. I will try and make this as, you're supposed to click the slide and then click share.
Or, yeah, you got it.
Got it. All right, you guys see that?
Yes, can you go into the presentation mode?
I will certainly do that.
Yep, and then it's perfect.
Is that it? No.
No, I think you want to click play from start.
Presenter, play from current slide, play from start. There we go.
Yep. Thanks, Taylor.
All right, so folks, this is going to be informal conversation. I hear you're over time, so I'm going to try and do this quickly and maybe even have some space for conversation. So I'm supposed to talk to you about recovery and resilience, and I'm calling this intersectionality in the COVID era, environment, economy, inequity. And if you allow me, what I'd like to do is to give you a little bit of my own personal journey into this space of intersectionality, because to be honest, I'm a reluctant environmentalist. It's not where I came from, but that's where I have evolved. So let me start by just telling you who I am and how I view and see the world. So I'm a late 60s child and went to college in the era of civil rights in the South. And I'm fundamentally an organizer. And my first major demonstration was the year after, telling my age now, that Martin Luther King passed away. And I got on a bus from Nashville, Tennessee, and went to Memphis for that first demonstration, which was really commemorating his passing. And that march was really about economic justice and the rights of Black sanitation workers to unionize and not, and have safety in the workplace. And my experience was this. That was the first time we was ever tear gassed, and over nothing. I think there was a shattered glass, and all of a sudden this whole paramilitary occupation of the Memphis Square took place. And I don't know if you've ever been tear gassed, but the headaches and all that happened. I mean, torrential rain came, and I was like, I was an 18-year-old, and for me, my first foray into the civil rights struggle, and then having this experience, I was saying, well, this is what nonviolence gets you. I'm not doing this. So it was also the beginning of the Black Power movement, and my afro was probably as big as, maybe not as big as Angela Davis, but I moved into a whole nother space about self-determination, self-realization, civil rights, economic justice, social justice, was where my sort of orientation from a university that you have to understand. I went to Fisk University, which was a historically Black college university in Nashville, where W.E. Du Bois graduated from, Ida B. Wells graduated from, John Lewis graduated from. So social justice was embedded in everything, every class we took, whether it was a chemistry class, a business law class, a sociology class. We were trained to affect change in our communities. And so one of the first experiences I had as an organizer was really forming cooperatives. I'm an urban planner, right? Urban planner that's taken an amazing journey. And my first experience as an urban planning student is this whole era of maximum community participation. I mean, that's what we were talking about in the late 60s and early 70s, and really working with communities, forming cooperatives. So the food cooperative, I was working with the Newark Welfare Rights as an intern, forming food cooperatives, building trust among community residents and engaging them in building their own local economies. Bronx housing cooperatives, working with Bronx neighborhoods and building housing cooperatives. So that was the beginning, and sort of moved, besides the little international development stint in Africa, really then talking about community development as an urban planner. How do we revitalize, at the time, communities that were divested in? We're fighting gentrification now. And they always say, be careful for what you ask for, because we were asking for investments in my early professional era, because we didn't have, we had one grocery store. This is in South Los Angeles, where I raised my sons and worked and played and built my village, a village of friends and sisters. And it was really about, how do we build housing? The markets failed us. The labor markets failed us. The financial markets failed us. The housing markets failed us. Everyone abandoned our communities. So we became our own community builders. We stopped asking folks for, come in and save us. And we built affordable housing. We built inner city retail and so forth. The whole environmental space was just, I just couldn't get it. In fact, I fought violently against it, because I started my graduate education in University of Penn, and it was a culturally alienating place. They didn't know us. It was sort of the second class of affirmative action Negroes, right? And they didn't understand us. We didn't understand them. And we saw that the curriculum really started talking about, all the EPA regs that were coming out in the 70s. And I just thought it took away the win, the investment, the people power away from civil rights and social justice and economic justice, and went towards, birds and trees and, all those things that I was not related to. I was just feeling, I was in that space where it was jobs versus the environment, social justice versus the environment. It was this dichotomy that I think that was challenging to me, and even to the extent that my sort of first direct engagement was as a commissioner in LA in the Environmental Quality Board. And, you know, we would have these conversations and nobody wanted their street. You know, most people that showed up were from the West Side and high wealth individuals or neighborhoods, and they didn't want the streets widened because the birds in the tree and, you know, all these things that is just for me was not grounded in my reality, in the world that I knew. But then I found out why I was on that board, because some of my neighbors came to me about a municipal incinerator project that nobody knew about. That was coming to our neighborhood, spitting distance away from our homes and from our schools. And we weren't recycling back in this is the early 80s, you know, so people were going to throw paint cans and plastic in this incinerator and ultimately create all this carcinogenic emissions within our communities. We organized 2.5 years, organized against it, our first environmental justice campaign, and ultimately we won by building a multi-ethnic citywide coalition. Because I went around and said to folks, first I quit the Environmental Quality Board because the mayor tried to put a muzzle on me to say that I couldn't have a public hearing because I had called for a public hearing. Or what is this thing? Nobody even knew about it. And put a muzzle on me. I, you know, it became a big, you know, the flame for the big mobilization. I went to the West Side and to the Valley, and I said, okay, guys, it's coming to South LA first, but you're next. And so it was through that coalition that we saw how change happened, how transformation could take place. Because first of all, they had the environmental lawyers, they had the scientists. We didn't, and bringing them into our fold gave us the power we needed to overturn that initiative. But really still then, I mean, it wasn't until I read a book, right, about the restoration economy that really changed my perspective and my journey actually about how the environment really has a relationship to something larger that I care about, social and economic justice. And it really just talked about, you know, if we invested in cleaning up 100 years of corrosion, corruption, contamination, everything that, you know, we screwed up in the industrial era, there would be jobs, there would be economic opportunities. We would be able to clean up our communities and the blight in our buildings and the brownfields in our neighborhoods. And for that was the first time where my worlds came together, and recognizing that what we were fighting in the environment, that there was a carbon and energy and economy nexus. That was, for me, the beginning of my work today, which is really as the president and CEO of a national organization that it's called Emerald Cities Collaborative, formed about 11 years ago, which really was when we were, by the way, the last time we were in this economic melee that we're in today, which said, well, how do we come out of this? How do we rebuild differently? And it was really about how we green our cities, build our communities, and strengthen our democracy. So our mission is oriented around this kind of triple bottom line. So the question for us, I mean, this carbon convergence factor is, you know, pushing us into intersectionality, where at the end of the day, it took me 40 years, right, to get to this notion of the intersections and seeing the relationships and the commonalities between what was killing nature, what was killing our communities, what was killing our families, and it's all coming from the same source. And so what I learned, and these are some of this growing movement, this intersectional movement of people of color and you know, folks in mainstream communities coming around and recognizing where we are today, that we cannot work as an environmentalist and not understand what it's doing to our economy and what the equity implications are. So this is a growing movement that you all are a part of. And so what we have today, and this is where I want to sort of roll into, is this COVID era, right? So what took me 40 years, I think the rest of the country, most of the country anyway, half of the country, is getting through a fire hose, right? In one intensive year, we recognize the intersection of our health crisis, our climate crisis, our economic crisis, and a reckoning with respect to racial justice. This is a good thing. And let me tell you, where the platform I sit on is that I'm extremely optimistic about what this moment represents, because it gives us an opportunity to reimagine, re-engineer, and to rebuild our society, our economy, and our communities in the way that you guys are struggling with. And I think that the COVID is obviously, we know what the challenges have been, and we've all been, experiencing it personally in terms of individuals who've had lost lives or know friends that have been impacted by their health, that have lost jobs, that have lost our local restaurants or our local businesses. All that takes place, but I think it's taking place. But I think what we're seeing is that we have the ability to reinvent and address the climate change. And part of it is really looking at our natural environment, but it's also really about our built environment and our need to really think about our economy, and knowing that the place that we're in is not just about fixing our streets and our buildings. I mean, there's no question we've got to stop carbonizing our atmosphere. We've got to quit changing the atmosphere where it's pushing us into extreme weather conditions, whether it's climate fires or floods or drought or heat waves. We can't do that anymore. And I think the solution that most environmental and climate activists are taking is really a technological, a tech-to-fix. How do we decarbonize the buildings with building electrification and building performance standards, and there's so many and solar and whether mounted solar or ground mounted or building. So we've got these wonderful technologies that are driving us to a better place on decarbonization, but really I think our environmental issues is where I started from. Is still an economic issue, that we have an economy and a value orientation around a growth engine, that we can continue to grow and grow and grow. We're just going to green everything without dealing with the structural inequities that are embedded in this dream, the American dream, which is actually turning into a nightmare. We also have to deal with not just our physical infrastructure and our economy, but also looking at our social and civic and cultural infrastructure, and particularly communities and low-income communities of color, and how we engage them in a way that I think I'm hearing you all talk about, how we engage them in this sort of meta challenge, right? We're challenged by long-term legacy of unemployment and poor education and a whole variety of things. So we're adding on top of that into our communities a legacy of unmitigated disasters and multiple stressors and overburdened infrastructure and strained public and social service systems that have been continually divested and instead reinvested in policing and correctional systems. We're isolated with, linguistically and physically, and with high mobility mortality rates that we've seen, for example, in the COVID era. So these are really challenges. So your job is really to figure out how to build resilience, right? It's in our natural environment, our built environment, our economic infrastructure, and our social and civic infrastructure. And I suggest to you that the biggest and most important thing is to get off the grid, right? And I think that's what you're doing in the context of your complete neighborhoods. But we certainly, and this is where my optimism is coming from, we have the opportunity to relocalize our economy, to get the food system off the grid, the energy system off the grid, the transportation off the grid, and become more local, more community oriented. And it is happening. It is happening everywhere. And it has to happen, because if you look at the first thing that happens in a man-made disaster or even a climate or natural disaster, what's the first thing that goes down? Our energy system, right? What's the second thing that goes down? Our food infrastructure, right? Because they're all on this centralized, distribution channel. But what's coming up as an alternative is the idea of local sustainable food, the slow food movement, the farm to table movement, the 50-mile menu movement. It's happening in cells all over the country. And it is the way, and particularly to think about how to make it vertically integrated. So if unlike what we saw in COVID, where the food producers were, 3,000 miles away and couldn't get to the people who needed the food, where they're standing in long food bank lines, right? That's that asymmetry it's got to change in the context of the new normal, which is, the climate challenge. So building out these local food systems, it's happening everywhere. We're doing that work in Oakland with our anchor institution, building, creating jobs, as well as supplier diversity in their supply chain. And not just community gardens, but really larger scale food production. We're seeing it in our energy infrastructure through not just greening the grid, right? Which is, unfortunately, I think with this administration, their primary focus is let's just green what we've got. No, let's deconstruct it. Let's decentralize it. Let's make it a part of a new economy. And so creating not only a greener energy source, but also a distributive energy, whether it's solar or whether it's microgrids, and can we make it community-owned microgrids so that we can actually build wealth at the same time, is part of what we're seeing. And then the economic opportunities in resilience are critical. So as we rebuild our economy, as we relocalize our economy, how do we create the jobs? And some of the environmental communities that I work with, their focus is strictly large greenhouse gas reduction, right? And sometimes that leaves out the multiplier that we need, the economic multiplier, to bring folks into producers, in terms of this green economy, and creating jobs for residents that have been on the periphery of the mainstream economy. Let's make sure that we are now central players, that we're quarterbacking this economy, not just in terms of jobs, but small minority women and veteran-owned businesses need to be invested in to be a part of this new economy, or else we're just going to reproduce income inequality and wealth disparities. And that cannot be, there's got to be a part of our solution is to addressing this. But I also want to suggest that in addition to this, we have to rethink our cultural values, our cultural values, where for us, as long as it's green, and more resilient, that we can still go and consume without consequence. We've got to build an economy that's still sustainable. We are 5% of the population, the world population. We are consuming 23% of the biodiversity in the world. That's inequity built in, and just in terms of our own lifestyle. We are 5% of the world population. We emit 25% of the carbon in the atmosphere. This is us. We bought into this, okay? We're slave to the fossil fuel industry, and how do we do that? And when you think about the energy consumption, increasingly it's discretionary energy. 23% of our energy consumption is for discretionary uses. The trips that we take and the shopping and the recreation, it's not for basic needs. It's not for food. It's not to heat our homes, or things that are really basic to human needs. It's this discretionary arena. And I think it's going to be the last mile in our effort to get to our carbon targets, is our own way of living and being and doing. And how do we embed that in your complete neighborhoods concepts and let people understand our contribution to the carbon climate challenge that we're in. And then the last thing is building community resilience. And that is, this is the hard work. My organization is an organization of labor unions, community-based organizations, environmental youth groups, and we have really, really, really hard conversations. It sounds like you guys have a little of that too. And you gotta have it. That is absolutely the work. And you can't get away from 100 years of misinformation, miscommunication, and mistreatment, all right? And there's a process. There's a process you have to engage in to really build the kind of civic infrastructure that's gonna be lasting and in a new era, right? And that process is organizing. You gotta start with organizing. I mean, I'm talking knocking on doors, not as I was hearing, the outreach, but knocking on doors and what matters to you. And then bringing people from that organizing into a common space, and then going through some therapy right? I'm a community developer. And so I say that community planning is one part organizing, one part therapy. You got to hear people and the pain that we bring into the conversation and honor it, put it up on the wall and say, and look at it and say, yep, okay, this is absolutely wrong. And then you cannot get to education and knowledge, which is the third phase, unless you go through that therapy part and understand that it can be pretty brutal at times. And then once everyone goes through those, then you can do the technical work that has to be done. But that's what we mean about, what I think about, I think we're there. And the last thing I will say is this is the moment in time where I do believe we have a new administration that is trying to figure out this intersectional work and how to do it. I had a meeting Thursday with the Secretary of Energy and her 13 leaders, and they're trying to figure it out at the national level, how to bring whatever that $2 trillion or whatever amount that's going to end up being into not just cities and states, but there were 7 community EJ/CJ groups that were at the table with them that said that it's got to get into communities, and we got to figure out how we help cities and states engage with communities in an authentic way, in a collaborative way, to build a new economy that we can all live with. It's not just building, recovering, and they say bouncing back. It's how do we bounce forward with something different? So folks, I think we can do it. And I really appreciate the chance to sort of just download, my worldview and my experience, and congratulate you on doing this hard work, and hope that you give yourself the widest lens to be, to do this work, the largest possible frame, and to keep it as intersectional as possible. That's my story.
You come off mute to give her a hand if you all want, so we get back into old school versions.
Woo, thank you. Thank you, Denise. What we are really trying to do here at Inc. with this climate sustainability committee, as well as Inc. in general, is to build this new civic infrastructure and do the hard work that needs to be done.
I don't know if you guys are shutting off or questions and answers, but I'm here for a minute.
So those of you who had questions early on, can you either raise your hand, or because I'd have to go way back. So Taylor, I don't know, there were a few questions. So if anybody wants to raise their hand, get their questions answered, please speak up now.
And Loretta, just for clarification, we should keep this for questions for Dr. Fairchild right now, right? In respect to her
so
time.
she can get back to
Correct. Correct.
Great. Just want to make sure that that's clear.
That's good. Everybody's
I'll ask a question then. I was waiting for others who may have had stuff in the chat. So and actually this is a kind of a broader question, and I think one that all of us in kind of the neighborhood organizations or trying to engage in any conversation struggle with, is really the how, right? I think all of us are really aligned around the what, right? And I think if you get a bunch of people in a room, a lot of people, you'll find agreement on the what, and that's the stuff we're talking about, those important things, those important conversations. But me personally, and my experience so far is that trying to just get people to the table is often the hardest part, and that's where it kind of fails. So it's like, and maybe this is a suggestion for Inc. in the future, is to have a forum on the how. How can we community organize better? How can we find more engagement? What's not working? I mean, and maybe we're not doing enough. But I struggle to find the how, and that's where I would like to see more guidance, because I want to do this work, but I just can't get to it because I can't get the people to come out.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that question, and that two things. Give yourself some slack, because it is hard. Two, as I said, civic infrastructure, our folks are overburdened. They're just they're home, they've got their kids, they've got, so many other things to do. So you're not going to get, a whole critical mass of folks. I mean, if you start with 6, if you start with 12, run with it, rock, okay? But it is first starting with community organizing. As I start this as an organizer, when we were trying to build co-ops, housing co-ops, with it just a building. I mean, it was the trust building work and knocking on doors and having a few people who come out and find out what matters to them, right? It's not what matters to us. We can come in and talk about climate, but it is what matters to them, and how do we then link that up to climate? How do they see that the kids having asthma has a climate influence or whatever? But then beyond that sort of organizing that conversation, that issue generation, it is then getting some victories, right? At small scale, short-term victories that build trust, that builds a sense of efficacy, that, working together is about power and accomplishment, and we can move the city to move money in different kinds of ways. And then success breeds success. More people want to join and build in. So there's nothing magical about it. It's just, it is a process. It's a developmental process.
Thank you.
I just want to chime in and acknowledge that we still have some students here from the Denver Youth Sustainability Group who are trying to move our school system. And I want to give you guys a chance to ask a question. I see Heather on the screen that I'm looking at.
So I'm not a student, but I'm a parent, and I'm mentoring the students. They had to get off there. Way busy, these students. I can't believe how involved they are. But I love what you're doing. I'm so excited to see what the community is doing, and I encourage anyone, I can put more stuff in the chat, but encourage you to support these students and continue to just make it a better world for them. I really appreciate it. But I didn't have any questions specifically for Denise.
Good.
I will chime in and say, I do think having the students makes our argument or purpose that much stronger. I mean, to kind of the question, my own question of like, how do we do this better? And I think finding the right ambassadors, and I think kids and the younger generation is a force and a tool that we could use. And I certainly am reaching out to this group and figuring out how I can get them in front of my community one of these days sometime soon. So I do think that's going to be, something we can try.
Well, in fact, I love that recommendation. It is, I think the future because it is their future, right? And they, first of all, they get it, that they get it. They understand climate better than anybody else. And secondly, creating them as leaders in this space and creating economic opportunities for them in this space, and getting to use their tools and their ways of doing things, their art and their culture to bring out, and their music to bring out others is a very powerful organizing strategy.
So there's a question in the chat from Adrian. Ms. Fairchild, you started by saying that doing it yourself is the key, not waiting around for somebody to do it for you. Could you say it again and tell us why that is so essential? We need to adopt it as a mantra.
I don't remember saying that. Did I say that? Well, let me.
You could say it now.
Well, what I think the core issue is that it's bottom up. It's at the community level. I think that the solutions, particularly at the federal level, is not that's not where change happens. They facilitate it. We're trying to handcuff a lot of the policies and the resources that are coming down to make it easier for communities to reimagine and rebuild their own space. But it is about community self-determination, community empowerment, and where you see community change. So that is how I've lived my life as a community developer, and that's where it's small enough where people can get to know each other and to break down the sort of the silos that we live in. If there's one thing that we have in common is that same street, right, or that pothole, or whatever that neighborhood challenge is that we can come around. So that's how you build social capital and can make change.
Dr. Fairchild, I have a question for you. My name is Sonrisa Lucero, and I'm in the Office of Climate Action and Sustainability Resiliency for Denver. We've had, it seems like an epiphany to a lot of people lately, but it makes sense when you think about it. And that is just kind of like the root causes of a lot of our environmental degradation, of climate action or climate change and everything like that are the same things that have caused racial inequity and, harm to people of color and low-income folks over the history of this country, right? And so, and that intersectionality is very key and critical. When you all have been working across the country with Emerald Cities, have you seen a way in which you're able to kind of approach this in a manageable way? Because it's like, okay, I don't know if I can change, all of the paternalism and capitalism and, like racism that is, happening in the country. But how can I start to attack that nugget on a climate justice, environmental justice level with that one city? Have you seen any common threads or commonalities among your different cities?
Yeah, I think there's a growing movement around, they're separate but related. There's an economic democracy movement, there's an energy democracy movement, and they're all coming out of I think a common paradigm developed by the Movement Strategy Center in Oakland. And it really is, and this is how I've always done my work, is that, first there's some people that are organized to fight the bad, right? All the isms and struggling against utilities and, bad corporate players and what have you. But then there's others that are building the good, right? So that there's a lot of efforts around, again, collective economics and cooperative enterprises. So that the notion of solar, community solar, and if it's going to be utilities scale solar, and I think we've had this conversation with Elizabeth, how do we make sure there's enough local beds? So how do we create the alternative to the bad? And you got to work on, I think, work on both fronts. So I'm not sure that there's an answer, but there are a number of groups that are in dialogue and developing initiatives and pilots around the country that begin to show the efficacy of these alternative ways of building a different kind of economy. I still think that there's a long way to, I don't think we're talking about the real root causes yet of what an extractive economy is and our participation in this extractive economy and how, again, it's destroying our environment, it's destroying our nature and everything. And that, we've objectivized the environment and not recognizing that we are the environment, the human resources and natural resources are really one and the same. And how do we rebalance our ecosystem and how is it our economy that of mass production and mass consumption and mass accumulation of wealth is not going to get us to a sustainable and resilient future. We're not having those tough conversations. Like I said, we're just talking about greening the grid. But we've got to show through evidence. We got to show folks that we can live large on less, that wealth is not as important as quality of life. That I think that what you're doing in your community, complete neighborhoods is the, it's going to be the proof that I think many other communities will be knocking on your doors to see how are you doing it and how is it making a difference, and how do we replicate this? And just as we see the slow food movement and slow wine movement and all these other local sustainable food movements, I think it's developmental, it's happening, and we just need to invest in those kinds of initiatives.
Thank you.
People over profits, exactly.
I think I'm going to just chime in because we're we're over and we're about at noon. And and I'm sure this is on the city who provided the Zoom link so we could stay on, and I think there's some comments in the chat that we clearly didn't get to. And, and maybe we could have people come back just to give answers, right? I think we'll go ahead and post some answers to the questions. The chat's being saved, right? Right, Taylor? So she's shaking her head, yes. So the chat will be saved. There'll be answers to questions. And I did see a comment that they wanted to know about how to do more, creating more nurturing programs and groups. I think that's something that we could definitely talk about, but indeed join the INC Climate and Sustainability Committee, work with them, because this is not just a one-time deal, right? This is ongoing. So we want to make sure that people are connected, that people will keep trying to connect, and people will working towards issues. So maybe Parry and Jane, we can talk about a forum later on in the fall, or something like that can talk about more questions, because this is a big issues, right? We have a lot of issues. We have, environmental justice issues that are impacting our neighborhoods, especially, Northeast Denver and Elyria, Swansea, Globeville. We have issues all along the former industrial areas. I know when I came to my neighborhood, when I test our soil, of course, we have lead in the soil. We all kind of do, but we have other issues that have impacted our neighborhoods, and we need to work on those issues. So I want to talk about moving forward, coming up with another maybe panel, or probably, maybe more of a discussion that we can have another meeting. But I think this has been a great introduction, a great overview, and I think there were some incredible questions in the chat. I want to make sure that we have an opportunity to have the appropriate people answer those questions. We will post them at denverinc.org. This whole forum will be on denverinc.org. It will be probably within a week, we're hoping, but we will get that on there, and we will make sure that things are addressed, and hopefully you'll be able to review this again, send this out to other, members of your community so they can watch this also. All right. And Jane, Parry, I want to thank especially, Denise Fairchild for coming and joining us in Denver. Thank you very much. But I want to thank all of our presenters, because it's been so helpful, and it's been really great to hear from everyone. I'm going to hand it back to Jane and Parry. Or anyone.
But Jane, I think you're
right. So thank you, Loretta. Thank you, Denise, and all of the speakers. I know there were a lot of concerns in the chat that we didn't have time to answer questions, and it was a one-way dialogue. And we realized that we really wanted to try to bring a lot of different issues to the forefront today, which I think we've done a really good job. We've got everybody all sort of stirred up, so that's a good thing. So take that energy and move with it and do something. It's a great day to get out in the garden today. I'm planning to do that myself. I wanted to quickly come back to what the Student Sustainability Board is asking of all of us, is to endorse their work that they're going to be doing. The reason they're doing this is that Denver Public Schools is not under the jurisdiction of the city of Denver. So the climate action issues with the city of Denver do not necessarily fall on Denver Public Schools. So they are asking us to help them make sure that Denver Public Schools and schools all around the state of Colorado, they've made a network throughout the state, that they will be asking for schools to take the climate action initiatives that the city and the state are putting out. So we want to be sure that everyone in INC endorses what they're doing, either as a group or as an individual RNO. Thank you all for your attention this morning. Have a nice weekend. Parry?
What I want to say really quickly is I hope everyone here that's still here heard what I heard. Both chat room questions and speakers, community activists, program leaders in the city, speaking from their hearts and minds, vast experience and knowledge. These roots and are so deep in terms of the structural challenges before us to combat both climate change, systemic equity, but at the times they are changing, there is an intense willingness to collaborate, to listen, to move forward. And we're so committed on this Climate Sustainability Committee to help create, I love that term, civic infrastructure, and a place for discourse and moving ahead and understanding where we are in Denver, getting out of our neighborhoods, going to see other neighborhoods. So I just want to encourage, again, that people sign up. I put the link in the chat a few times for our Climate and Sustainability Committee. We'll be doing sessions quarterly. The next one will be July 15th, and it is already going to be about climate justice. We will listen. We have listened, and we'll try to pick up on Loretta's idea at that very moment to move ahead this conversation and make it a little more interactive than today we had time for and we really want to tackle with these questions. So sign up, get more information. We're trying to build our distribution list. We are brand new. We have plans for the year. We want you to help engage with us. And Tara Tull, if you're still on the call, is doing a newsletter for us. She's a professor and she is good. Keith Meyer, Wanda Osterman helping with the outreach. Thank you so much for all of this. So sign up for our network. The last thing, if there are no more questions that need to be entertained, is for all of you who've stayed through the credits, basically, we wanted to end with this phenomenal poem by Amanda Gorman. It was a poem read from the stage at the Los Angeles Climate Reality session in 2018 when she was 20. And we're ready to share the screen if there's no something else to keep us from doing that. You won't be sorry for staying on. It's a great way to celebrate this most amazing day that you all have shared with us.
On Christmas Eve, 1968, astronaut Bill Anders snapped a photo of the Earth as Apollo 8 orbited the moon. Those three guys were surprised to see from their eyes a planet looked like an Earthrise, a blue orb hovering over the moon's gray horizon with deep oceans and silver skies. It was our world's first glance at itself, a first chance to see a shared reality, a declared stance, and a commonality, a glimpse into our planet's mirror. And as threats drew nearer, our own urgency became clearer as we realized that we hold nothing dearer than this floating body we all call home. We've known that we're caught in the throes of climactic changes some say will just go away, while some simply pray to survive another day. For it is the obscure, the oppressed, the poor who, when the disaster is declared done, still suffer more than anyone. Climate change is the single greatest challenge of our time. Of this, you're certainly aware. It's saddening, but I cannot spare you from knowing an inconvenient fact, because it's getting the facts straight that gets us to act and not to wait. So I tell you this not to scare you, but to prepare you, to dare you to dream a different reality where, despite disparities, we all care to protect this world, this riddled blue marvel, this little true marvel, to master the verve and the nerve to see how we can serve our planet. You don't need to be a politician to make it your mission to conserve, to protect, to preserve that one and only home that is ours. To use your unique power to give next generations the planet they deserve. We are demonstrating, creating, advocating. We heed this inconvenient truth because we need to be anything but lenient with the future of our youth. And while this is a training in sustaining the future of our planet, there is no rehearsal. The time is now Now, because the reversal of harm and protection of a future so universal should be anything but controversial. So, Earth, pale blue dots, we will fail you not, just as we chose to go to the moon. We know it's never too soon to choose hope. We choose to do more than cope with climate change. We choose to end it. We refuse to lose. We do this and more, not because it's very easy or nice, but because it is necessary. Because with every dawn, we carry the weight of the fates of this celestial body orbiting a star. And as heavy as that weight sounded, it doesn't hold us down, but it keeps us grounded, steady, ready, because an environmental movement of this size is simply another form of an Earthrise. To see it, close your eyes, visualize that all of us in this room and outside of these walls or in these halls, all of us change makers, or in a spacecraft floating like a silver raft in space, and we see the face of a planet anew. We relish the view, we witness its round green and brilliant blue, which inspires us to ask deeply, wholly, what can we do? Open your eyes, know the future of this wise planet is right in sight, right in all of us. Trust this earth uprising, all of us bring light to exciting solutions never tried before, for it is our hope that implores us at our uncompromising core to keep rising up for an earth more than worth fighting for.
I think it's a wrap. Thank you, everybody.
All right, we're going to go ahead and close for today. And thank you all. It was incredible. Thank you so much. Please go to the INC website and look at that. So you will find, you know, and keep looking. If you don't see it in a week, we'll put it on a little later. And we'll try and get some questions answered also. But also, you can rewatch this if you want to. All right. Anything else before we close for today?
Just to let tell everyone else about Inc. and the great work we're doing and the kinds of forums that we're holding so that they can all participate. So please share this with your networks.
And our next month presentation will be our second. And the first one was rethinking the police. The next forum will be, you know, we're looking at rethinking the, it's kind of more the criminal justice. So it's looking at ticketing, ticketing and then arresting and the court process and the legal process. So dealing with that, it's a big issue also. So that will be our next topic. So please join us on the second week in May. So thank you all and have a great day. Thanks so much.